This is Polyamory Weekly, tales from the front of responsible non-monogamy from a pansexual, kink-friendly point of view. A warning for our under-18 listeners. This is an adult-oriented podcast about really lascivious things, like communication and honesty in relationships. If you're under 18 and looking for upfront advice and answers to questions about sex, please visit scarletteen.com.
This is Polyamory Weekly, episode 528 for August 24th, 2017. Coming up on today's show, an interview with Chris Smith. That's coming up on today's show. Hello, everyone. I am your host, Minx, and this is Polyamory Weekly. Welcome to our new listeners. Welcome back to those of you who've been listening for a while and know all the shit about polyamory and sex-positive communication and all of that. Happy to have you. Now, I really want to dive into the interview with Chris really quickly because he was an amazing fucking interview. But there was a fun poly in the news this week, so just a quick little diversion before we get to that. You know, I said a while ago that you know you've arrived when The Onion is making fun of you. And that is true. A year or two ago, The Onion had a fantastic article mocking poly people and their penchant for drama, which, you know, can often be the case. But perhaps it's true that you've really arrived when advertising agencies decide that you are a demographic that needs to be targeted. Yep, there is another ad campaign out there that is portraying polyamorous people. This one is an ad for Yoplait, and it shows a French woman with 3 hot French guys, and this is the first campaign for the Oui is not your mama's yogurt. So Yoplait has been competing with some of the Greek yogurt companies and everything. It's kind of perceived as a little bit of an old-fashioned brand. So this is their way of contradicting that. And the tagline is, "C'est oui to pleasure," with a young French girl and her 3 French boyfriends. Whoa. Okay, they don't actually say that. But it is interesting that several companies are now finding it okay, in fact, even a positive thing, to depict polyamory in their campaigns as something that is desirable, perhaps even enviable, perhaps even a tad exotic. Now, in the entertainment and ad industries, Alan points out in his Poly in the Media article, they have been interested in polyamory and the fact that it's sort of attention-grabbing. But there haven't been too many that have really made that plunge because there can be so many negative reactions. And apparently, at least for Yoplait, we have hit the tipping point so that the fear of the negative reaction is not as strong as the promise of the positive reaction, or at least a level of interest. So I'm not sure whether this is a good thing or a bad thing for us. It simply is. But I'm going to argue that depictions of polyamory in the media are at least perhaps going to get more people talking about it. Kind of like, well, I don't know. I mean, 50 Shades of Grey was a horrible book and horrible everything, but it got people talking about and aware of BDSM and kink and, you know, ended up bringing a lot of joy and hopefully consensual pain to a lot of people, as well as undoubtedly some non-consensual pain. So I'm not sure exactly what I'm hoping for in terms of seeing more poly representation in advertising, but what I do want is for more people to have access to information about polyamory, for them to be able to Google it and find great resources, books, podcasts, blogs, and movies, webisodes, so that they can do their own research and decide what is real and what will work for them. And now, without further ado, I bring you the amazing interview with Chris Smith. I am super thrilled to welcome for the very first time to the Poly Weekly studios this wonderful person that I met at Poly Dallas Millennium, Chris Smith. Welcome.
Hi, how are you?
I am fantastic. How are you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Awesome. Thanks so much for agreeing to be on the show.
Thank you. No, it's an honor. I listen to it often, so to finally be on it is It's like I'm kind of geeking out right now.
Well, you and me both, because I read your latest paper, which totally blew me over. But first, why don't you introduce yourself for those who may not know who you are or be familiar with your work?
Okay, well, hi everybody. My name is Christopher Smith. I'm a native Washingtonian in Washington, D.C. I'm a PhD student at Howard University, where I study higher education. And I'm a relationship researcher. Majority of my research is focused around non-monogamous relationships within the African American or the Black demographic.
Very cool. And you recently came out with this amazing paper called Open to Love, Poly, and the Black American.
Yes.
What led you to write this particular paper?
Every time I would go to poly events or, Google polyamory or non-monogamy, I didn't see a lot of African American or Black representation. And even within Facebook groups and the like, and I just wanted to write something that particularly spoke towards the African American situation with relationships, history, and how different things can be forces of change and growth for the African American community.
I took a gander at the paper, and even the abstract is fascinating. So your quick summary is that the estimate that about 4 to 5% of the population in general self-identifies as poly, and that, as you say, Black people of color are very much underrepresented. So for the purposes of this interview, should I use people of color or Black? I noticed in your paper you used the word Black.
Yeah, I use the word Black particularly because people of color can incorporate Latinos, Latinx, Native American, and the like. That's usually like some group. I wanted to focus particularly on the Black American or the African American.
So let's start talking about that, because one of the first questions that you ask and subjects you dive into is what exactly does quote unquote Black mean, and is that term useful?
Right. That's a question I often mull over in my own mind. Knowing Black history with the slave trade, and then from there on slavery and the mixture with different ethnicities, to define what Black is particularly is like trying to pull one single piece out of a quagmire of pens. Like if we're looking for one red pen in a massive red pens. So it being Black, you can have a mixture of, you can be English, you can be British, you can be Mexican, you can be Puerto Rican, you can be Native American, you could even be a multitude of ethnicities. But because of skin color and because of the idea of the phenotypical characteristics and traits defining people that really rose in the 1800s, being Black was based off just simply the hue of your skin. So
can you define phenotypical for us?
So phenotypical are your physical characteristics, your hair, your eye color, the hue of your skin, and things of that nature.
Okay. One of the other things you talked about in this paper was you actually went through very briefly some of the historical manifestations of polyamory, covering like the Oneida commune, the Muswo tribe, some polygyny in Russia, which was actually new to me. That was actually very interesting. I like that you really dispelled this idea that this is some crazy idea that some 1960s hippies or these crazy millennials thought up, right?
Right. Exactly. It's pivotal. There's always a saying that nothing new is under the sun, and literally nothing is really new under the sun. The idea of communal lifestyles or communal romantic relationship styles is nothing new. We have done it for years, particularly in agricultural communities. And also when things like lineage and the passing down of personal property weren't that pivotal. The idea of marriage and the structure of marriage is something that's relatively, as we see it monogamously now, is something that has existed, but its prevalence and its reign, or its hegemonic reign in the world is new. The idea that, all these young kids are just out here, as my mother would say, and I love my mother to death, but she, out here just doing freaky stuff. I'm like, but my grandfather had multiple partners and he just lied. And my uncles had multiple partners and they just lied. So obviously this is something that's not foreign to us. And there has to be ways, and I know there are ways to not deceive or lie in the midst of loving multiple people.
Why is it that when you start delving into polyamory, many of us discover that many of our family members, not to mention our friends, were actually poly in one form or another, but never talked about it?
Well, because it's the taboo. So when you grow up my family was very traditional. I'm talking about a lot of my family are Republican, Christian conservative, and they wanted to uphold to a certain value or moral, even though their basic human needs were still showing forth. Basically, perception. Nobody wants to be seen as the quote unquote polygamist. It's illegal, literally. Like by law, it's illegal.
Yes, that's the issue that my mother has with it.
Right.
She seems to think that my partner and I are somehow legally married, even though, well, that's illegal, so we're not.
Right.
But that's her primary objection, I think, as opposed to the morality, interestingly enough.
Right.
But continue.
You have the legal objection, and then some people are afraid of, the myth of, what about the kids? How are you going to now raise, children in the midst of having all these multiple partners? But I'm like, it's actually awesome. You have a community of people to help raise kids, which we used to have, But I really think the biggest thing, and this is one of the issues that I often speak about in workshops, is how we focused all our relationships, or the focus of our relationships and the definition of many of our relationships is sex, physical sex alone. And a lot of people can't get past the sex pedestal to put everything else up on the pedestal with sex. Like, I never would say take sex off a pedestal because it's important, but raise communication on that same pedestal, raise flexibility on that same pedestal. All these things matter, but we define, particularly in Western culture, a lot of our relationships based off who we're having sex with. And a lot of people can't get out of that mindset.
What do you say to people who have difficulty getting out of that mindset?
The first question I asked them was like, when was the last relationship what was your last relationship like? And they'll know, let's say a multitude of things. And I'm like, was sex the main point of that relationship? They're like, oh, of course not. I was like, okay, so when you stopped having sex, did that change everything else? Yeah. So why was sex not the main point of the relationship? And then you see him stop and think for a second, like, dang, we really did make sex really that important. I don't think that it's difficult because we've been taught this is particularly, when I growing up, my mom was just like, hey, you have sex with somebody, they're yours. Like, you magically get like some shackles once I stick my penis into somebody. Like, I handcuff their hand and feet and they have to come with me.
Well, women were property for a long time. So yeah, that kind of, that was legally true for a long time.
Exactly. Going back to the legality piece. I attack it from that personal way. And then I go to what is marriage and what is relationship? And what do these things mean to you? And have you had a great relationship with somebody you haven't had sex with? What about your friends who you don't have sex with? What about the individuals in your life who are probably the most emotionally and mentally close to you? Would you not define that as a quote unquote relationship simply because y'all haven't, slapped butt cheeks together? I don't know. But it's really the critical thinking of what is really important in a relationship. And I always distinguish between a big R relationship and a little r relationship. The big R relationship is like a relationship. Whether it's like, hi, nice to meet you. We are now relating to each other. We're in a relationship. And then the little r relationships that we like to try to delineate them, like you're in a romantic relationship, you're a boyfriend and girlfriend, you're married, you're in a partnership, you're in friends with benefits, sometimes coworkers. It's
interesting.
We put all these little r labels on the bigger idea of a relationship, which is really just two people being in communication and that communication continuing.
One of the questions I like to ask is, has there ever been a point in your marriage or relationship when you weren't having sex for one reason or another? Maybe somebody was sick or away, or maybe you were just mad at each other. It's like, were you then no longer married because you were no longer having sex?
Exactly. And there's plenty of times in my relationships where I haven't had sex. My reason for consensual non-monogamy and polyamory wasn't sex. It was so I could be completely transparent and emotionally honest with people. That's what pushed me to it. Now, not going to lie, being able to be physically intimate with multiple people and it be okay, it's a plus. It's not so, that I'm going to, it's cool. But yeah, it wasn't the point for me was the emotional transparency. It was the ability to be.
And I want to stress, too, that we are not saying there are plenty of people for whom sex is a really important reason for having relationships that have a very strong sex drive, and that Completely. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just using sexual fidelity to define marriage or whether it's a quote-unquote real relationship just doesn't necessarily work for everybody.
Exactly. And it's so limited.
Something else that was very interesting in your paper, and yes, by the way, I will provide a link to this in the show notes at polyweekly.com for those of you who are like, Minx, what paper? What are you talking about? Where can I download this? You mentioned Dr. Sari van Anders' work on sexuality as sexual configuration theory.
Right.
Can you explain this and talk about how or why it might be helpful?
Okay, so before I start, Dr. Sari van Anders is a great person. Everybody should go and read her theory outside of it. I will do my best without butchering it. But basically, her theory, it really takes into account the multiplicity of relationship and sexuality. Like, for example, with relationship, she has a relationship number, limit or maximum, the type of relationship, whether it's only physical or emotional, and then a gradation or grading of how important each aspect, whether it's the relationship number or whether it's the type of relationship from friend to romantic, how that matters on your scale of relationship configuration as a whole. It really takes into account how much things within relationships intersection. And it really blew me away, particularly the basically like the relationship number. Like, is it fluid? She says, is it fluid? Is it more solid? Is it something that continues to change over a span of time, or does it not change over a span of time? It really allows people to look at themselves and the idea of relationship in a way that is not binary.
And the relationship number is the number of people you're in romantic relationships with, yes?
Yes. Yes, it's a number of people you're in a romantic relationship with.
Right. So for some people, it's one and will always only be one.
Right, exactly.
And for others, it's 2, 3, and others, it's, as many as there is time and energy for.
Over 9,000.
Something under 1 million, something more than 2. I have to admit that section of the paper was a bit thick for me, and so I kind of skimmed over it in truly American style.
Gotcha.
But it gave me the question, is her research and this idea of sexual configuration theory, could this be helpful in determining or defining polyamory as a sexual orientation rather than a relationship structure preference? Many people ask this question. I think it's kind of silly. I'm like, look, people do what they want to do. It doesn't really matter. Right. But for some people, they really need to hear that this is natural and hardwired into, all of us or certain people. Take your pick. But do you think that her research is driving towards that and might be able to help come with the definition? Or is it simply reflecting something that she already sees existing?
Well, I think it's twofold. The theory definitely is describing stuff that already exists. But it is also it's taking the idea of relationship and partner number outside of just sex, but it's not solely making it a relationship simple orientation. It's definitely, she's doing both. And she's seeing it because a part of the partner number, it didn't only have to do with sexuality. It was about whether this is an emotional partner or this is a sexual partner, along with partner number, and the importance of a relationship to the individual. Like me personally, I see polyamory, non-monogamy, monogamy, or the like as relationship constructions or orientations, because sexuality is included in and is a characteristic of a relationship. Because big R versus little r. Like, sex is part of a relationship, communication is part of a relationship. Going out and eating is part of your relationship. How you spend quality time is part of your relationship. So instead of pitting them against each other, make one a smaller part of a bigger piece.
There's also a section that I found incredibly helpful as somebody who is not that familiar with the experience of people of color in general and sort of that particular type of framing. I've been working on educating myself, so I'm just going to give a shout out to people. If you're trying to be a better ally and you want just like a super quickie section that's just a few pages long on sort of positioning a little bit of the Black experience and how that has been for nearly 400 years and up to current income disparities. Obviously, it's very short, but it's a great place. I found it a great place to start.
Right.
So thank you for that.
No problem. No problem.
Let's talk about your proposition that polyamory might be a solution for dealing with some of those income and economic and disparities and for the emotional challenges that some people face.
So my thesis is basically relationship is a driving factor in everything that we do. When you're dealing with politics, when you're dealing with everything, it's all about relationship. The one thing that is the one thing that is a backlash from slavery and after that Jim Crow and segregation is the destruction of Black unity or African American ability to unite to build certain economic systems and structures. For one of the huge examples is Black Wall Street, which was in Oklahoma. Literally, it was a prosperous Black community where the businesses were working within each other, selling within each other, and all the Black individuals there were wealthy. It got bombed and destroyed by the surrounding white neighbors.
When did this happen?
But this was definitely 1900s in Oklahoma.
Crazy.
I believe it's
Okay.
1900s. I'll come back for it with an exact date. But you see this has happened consistently. There was another movement in Philly under a guy named John Africa. This was more recent. And if you just type in Google John Africa, Philly is burning, John Africa had a commune, pretty much a section block in Philly, where they were a self-sustaining community. However, at the time, they weren't cool with that. So they literally dropped bombs on top of the houses of the community, and it ended up burning an entire part of Philly just to break apart this economic commune. The idea that opening up family relationships or breaking away from the monogamous ideology, which I want to clarify, I think monogamy is a great thing. And I think the people who attest to it and live it, if they live it with integrity, they live it in honesty, and they give it all that they can, it is and can be a great relationship structure. My parents are monogamous. They've been married for 35 years. So shouts out to anybody living in an honest and integral relationship. With polyamory particularly, you have the ability to pull resources together like businesses do when they merge. You have the best of one part of a business to the best of another part of a business. You bring them together, and maybe the best of one business can compensate for the weakness of the other. And particularly in the Black American situation, we have the lowest incomes. We own the least resources. Anytime I get in a conversation with other Black Americans, when we talk about revolution, they're like, yeah, we should just revolt. I'm like, yeah, but where are we going to get our water? We don't own our water. We don't own our land. We don't own the ability of food. We have nothing. Everything we have, though we are quote unquote free and have civil rights, is still given to us by somebody else. And if that's cut off, we're right back into slavery. And that's the issue. So polyamory, it maybe not a solution, but it is a way for us who don't have much to join together so we can have more.
It sounds like a big danger of that, though. If Black Wall Street was bombed and other economic communes, for lack of a better word, scared the shit out of everybody else, apparently to the point of violence, what's to say that wouldn't happen in a polyfamily situation? Isn't that kind of scary?
It's extremely scary, and it's definitely a possibility, but something still has to be done. And when you're united and have that, you'll have more protection and support. Being a Black male, I walk down the street and I fear for my life. That's just a norm. Unfortunately, you see it on the news every day. Historically, it's been the norm, particularly in the United States. I'd rather be afraid with a group of people who are looking out with me than afraid by myself. And also, it would say that the median income, and I know I have the exact number in my paper, the income for individual Black income or median earnings for a Black male is, let's say, $46,000 for year-round workers. All the rest of the U.S. is 64,000. The median family income for the black family, or the 40,000 to 62. For a male household, it's 33. For a black female, it's 25. I'd rather have 3 33s than one.
What are the other challenges, though, that Black people are going to have to face if they do decide to start, being more open about polyamory, or open to the idea, at least in terms of economic sense and co-parenting sense, if nothing else?
Well, start out with the most obvious is the legal portion. When you have co-parenting, when you have multiple adults in it, the legal justifications, it can get tricky. The idea of who's going to marry who for what legally, and how that plays into the dynamic of the relationship. Then you have the intersection of race and relationship as a whole. The danger of one having, like you said, having a congealed unit together, and how that can intimidate. Then you also have just basic human relationship stuff that comes up, which anybody, regardless of race, will face. You'll have, being polyamorous as a whole, you'll have to be in a closet about it. You won't be able to be as open about it. And within the Black community, there really is still such a sense of conservatism and phobias towards alternative or differing sexualities that you'll have to deal with the backlash, similar to what the homosexual community had to deal with and the trans community has to deal with. It's all a similar battle of breaking norms. And the majority of the Black population is housed in the South. In the South, we know about the South.
Not the most open-minded, not the most tolerant.
Not the most open-minded, not the most tolerant. But then you also goes into health resources. We all know, or we should have an idea, that relationship and mental health go hand in hand. If you don't have accessibility to certain mental health services, such as counseling or the like, you're losing an advantage. A lot of Black Americans don't have counseling accessibility. Most have never been to a counselor. A lot are afraid to go to any medical professionals because of the history of medicine and the African American. A great book for that is the Medical Apartheid. And that book literally explains how African bodies have been used to test everything from creams to acne creams to prisoners who were injected with different serums and medicines and paid what they thought was more through their commissary, to the Tuskegee experiments, to all of these. So you also have that tension with the medical community, and then access to insurance. There are a lot of impoverished individuals that are African American that, particularly if the Obamacare is repealed, won't have access to health services at all.
Much less a poly-friendly therapist.
Much less a poly-friendly therapist.
Which do exist and, can do things over the phone, but it's hard. As you say, for a lot of people, there's a stigma. It's expensive. I know a lot of people that need it, know they need it, aren't too ashamed to go, but can't afford it.
Can't afford it.
Exactly.
And then for me, what I may feel is the most important obstacle for the Black American or for the African American when it comes to living polyamorously is accepting that being Black, you're already ostracized, you're already outsider. Now being polyamorous and Black, you're adding in another discriminatory factor. And to deal with the mountains and mountains of discrimination and then add that on, it's a hard job. Being a Black male and polyamorous, I'm either called a pimp or I'm compared, immediately. Like, you just want to be like a rapper, or you just want, you just want all the hoes, or you just da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And already being Black, being seen as aggressive. And then the hypersexual stereotypes that come with being a Black male as well. Like, we have the biggest this, our sex is this, we're just dominant beasts, da-da-da-da-da. That still permeate through people's minds, even though it may come out as, I've never had sex with a Black guy before. I wonder what it's like.
Oh my gosh. I want to shift gears a little bit. You mentioned in the paper that you did a survey about poly awareness that was targeted at the Black community, basically to see if people knew about poly, what they thought it was. You mentioned some of the results in the paper. Do you have more information? What did you discover so far?
what I discovered so far, and I probably polled 100 because I had a 99 in there, and I've added 100 more to it. I'm gonna have it be an ongoing poll. Is that social economic status as well as educational status? And education plays into social economic, but income, education, and region of origin really play a huge role in who knows what polyamory is. If you, as you know, with education, particularly higher education, all the respondents that had at least a bachelor's degree or some college education, all chose the right option of what polyamory was. Also, people who lived in city areas knew and were able to, at a higher percentage, what polyamory is. People with higher income, and there's always this saying that, polyamory is for rich people.
Yeah.
Which is
not true. It wasn't until I moved to Seattle that I actually saw poly people who were not poor and living way away from the cities because it's all they could afford.
Exactly. But you also found that with certain income as well, because with income, you may have the ability for more education and you may have the ability to live closer to certain cities, that they more often answered it correctly.
And correctly meaning the accepted definition of polyamory. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So it was interesting. I really want to get up, and these were all Black American, African American, Black identifying individuals. I want to get it to about my goal number within the next 2 years is 3,000 to 4,000. So I can actually do a stronger statistical analysis, other than just descriptive statistics, to really see what we can pull to see if, really, is there really a statistical significance behind your level of education to your knowledge of of lifestyle, and what other things can we do within the African American community to help people come to understand that this lifestyle is an option that exists, and it can be a healthy option for people.
Ooh, and can you provide me with a link to that study so I can share it in the show notes so we can get to that number faster?
Will do.
Awesome. You've obviously got a lot going on. You're also working on your PhD at Howard University. What is your current project, or what's up next?
My current project in the polyamory realm is the Black Polyamorous Anthology. It is an awesome project. It really, when I was doing the publication is a lot of academic. It was focused for journals and the like to have a scientific and research-based basis for it. The anthology is all about everything else. It is going to be a collection of, whether it is a tweet that somebody has said about polyamory that is African American, identifying as Black, African American, or Black American, a video about them talking about their lives, poetry. It can be a written play, or it can be whatever people want to. I just want to collect artistry and collect writings and pieces that can represent the mass that is the Black American. Black Americans, whenever we think Black, we often think the statistics. We often think the stereotypes. But the Black American, as I said in my paper, is such a diverse demographic. It incorporates so much, and it needs to be heard. And I already have 25 people responding. Kevin Patterson, shout out to him. He's going to write for it. Ignacio Rivera, they are writing for it. Dr. Zaleka Hepworth Clark is contributing. Of course, I'm going to contribute some pieces. So there's many people. Cato Cooks, Ron Young. There are a lot of people who are excited and really pushed me to do it. So if anybody out there listening identifies as Black, African American, Black American, and you want to contribute a piece, I'll make sure in the show notes you can get it, or just email me at tenabilitymovement@gmail.com.
Awesome. And we'll provide that link in the show notes.
Yes.
I can't wait to see the final result of that project. I want it to be done already so I can read it. So, Chris, this has been an amazing time together. I really appreciate your taking the time out of what appears to be a very busy schedule. How can people get hold of you and find out more about you and your work?
I primarily have Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. All of them are MrTenability, and that's MrTenability. And a little background on the tenable, to be tenability, because people are like, why do you use tenability? To be tenable is to be defensible or able to defend. My goal in life has always been able to defend things or defend people when they make their choices. I would be a lawyer, but law school's expensive.
Yeah.
So, and help people shape and think things through to the point where it's not just, well, I'm doing this because I believe, because that has been problematic throughout the years, such as crusades, bombings, genocides, so on and so forth. I believe that our decision-making should be beyond just what we believe, but we should always check our belief with what we know and expand what we know.
Well, so well said that I'm going to end the interview right there. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Always.
And thanks again to Chris Smith for joining us for that fabulous interview. You know, the more people I meet and interview from Poly Dallas Millennium, the more excited I am about next year's Poly Dallas Millennium. So go Ruby, go Goody. Well, that about wraps it up for this show. I want to thank everybody for your contributions, whether you are subscribing, if you have written us a review, if you're one of our playmates who donates to Polyweekly every single month, even though you don't have to, or if you simply told a friend about Polyweekly and told them to subscribe and listen now. We appreciate all of that. That helps keep this podcast going. If you have questions, comments, or feedback, email polyweekly@gmail.com, call 802-505-POLY, or find us on Twitter @Polyweekly, and I'm @CunningMinx, or facebook.com/Polyweekly, or of course our website where you can search all of our archives at polyweekly.com. Thanks for listening, everyone, and remember, it's not all about the sex.